Hello, welcome to Ann Teaches Bible. We are beginning today in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verse 1. I would like to introduce you to Luke first. The first thing about it is the Gospel. We call it that because it means simply good news. That's what it is in Latin. Gospel equals good news. And the four Gospels in the Bible are Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And they're telling us that this is good news about Jesus. They're biographies. That's all they were intended to be. Biographies were written to help us to believe Jesus and what has happened, what the miracles he did and who he was. We know another thing about Luke is that he was a companion of Paul. When you read in Acts, another book in the Bible, it talks about how Paul went on missionary journeys. He went on 4 missionary journeys, and on, I think it was 2, but I'm not sure right now. But Luke was with him. And we read in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14, where Paul says, Luke, the beloved physician, or the dear doctor, sends his greetings. So that's another thing we've learned about Luke, is that he was a doctor. This meant he was a very educated man. It also meant that he was interested in physical details that are not evident in the other 3 Gospels. And so when he writes, today we'll read about Elizabeth, that she was 5 months pregnant. Not many people would have even been concerned about that, but he was a doctor, and that was something that was evident to him. So we begin with his introduction, and that's the first 4 verses. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. Before I continue on, I want to tell you I'm reading in the Living Translation, the New Living Translation, which is a more modern English version. It doesn't make any difference what version of Bible you have, and even what language it's in, because the intent of the Bible is always to have the words mean the same thing. And so while you might have differences in words or phrases, they're going to be saying the same thing. So back to Luke chapter 1, verse 1. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write a careful account for you. I'm going to stop there. That's in the middle of verse 3. I want to note he used eyewitness accounts. Luke actually had the means to go back and talk to people who were there and saw Jesus from the very beginning. He probably talked to Jesus's family and learned history of what had happened as Jesus was growing up. He talks. There's in later on in Luke we hear about when Jesus was about 12 years old. It's another story. He obviously talked to somebody who was there when Jesus was 12, and he talked to the disciples throughout Jesus's ministry. And so we have an account that can be trusted, and that was Luke's intent. So let's go back to verse 3. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write a careful account to you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. Theophilus, we have no knowledge of who that man was. We know that when here he's talking, when he called him most honorable Theophilus, we believe that may have meant that he was a high official in the Roman government. We really don't know, but most honored was the accepted way. You know how when we talk to a king or even a judge, we may use a very careful honorific, and that's what he used. So he uses most honorable Theophilus. So we assume that he was a high official. But the Greek means lover of God. And that is so dear to my heart because I am a lover of God. And I believe you are, if you know anything about Him and if you want to, if you've accepted and become a Christian, a lover of God. So, although I am certain it was written to a specific person, I still feel like I fit under that. And Luke was writing to me. He was writing to you if you're a lover of God. And I like that. And he says he wrote this so that I wrote the account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. It's very easy to think that these guys who lived 2,000 years ago were not like us, maybe somehow, or they were not as educated, or, well, they may not have been as educated as we are, but they were educated for that day, and they thought the same things. They were deep thinkers, just like people are today. And if you want to hear a truth that's going to change your life, you need to be certain that is truth. And that's why Luke wrote this for Theophilus. So Theophilus could put his complete faith in these words, and they have been preserved by God. So we can put our complete faith in the words of the Bible. So then he begins, and that is in verse 5. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. Now, first of all, when Herod was king of Judea, if you were to study history in detail, that would tell you exactly what time. And we do know that this happened in Judea, so we could find out exactly. Now, we do not know the precise year or month, but we do know this happened when Herod was king of Judea. So, verse 5. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. He was a member of the priestly order of Abijah, and his wife, Elizabeth, was also from the priestly line of Aaron. I want to point out that in the Jewish tradition, there was the tribe of Aaron, and anyone who was born into the tribe of Aaron, and this did include Zechariah because Abijah was a descendant of Aaron, but anyone who was born into the tribe of Aaron was by birth, by hereditary, a priest, and they could choose to take up the responsibilities in office, but this was just by birth. The way it was assumed that if God put you into that tribe into the priestly tribe, then you were meant to be, at least meant to have the chance to be a priest. So Zechariah, this at verse 6, Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. We have seen too much in history where a person born into a office don't live up to it. But the Bible is clear. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes. They were careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. That's important. They had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. One day, Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priests, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. Going into the sanctuary was not a regular occurrence. It was done only at certain times of the year. And to burn incense meant they would be burning, fragrant spices and stuff. But the smoke, it symbolized the prayers of saints going up to the Lord. And so he's going up, burns the incense so that smoke can fill the sanctuary and just bring up those prayers to the Lord as our prayers fill our hearts. And then in verse 10, while the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. That's another indication that this was a special event, to have a whole crowd of people. one didn't have a whole crowd, a great crowd outside praying every single day. But this day was a special day for some reason, although the Bible doesn't tell us why. One day, no, verse 11, while Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer." Almost every time an angel appears to somebody in the Bible, the very first thing he has to say is, "Don't be afraid. Fear not. Don't be afraid." I would imagine if any of us were to see an angel in all of its glory, that would be the first thing we would feel, fear. He's so powerful. God has given them such power. And to have this come before us, oh yeah, we would have fear. And so that's the first thing that the angel had to say to Zechariah, don't be afraid. But he continues on. This would be verse 13. But the angel said, don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you are to name him John. So I looked up John to find the meaning, and the meaning is God is gracious. Now, I think that if an angel is going to come and tell me that I'm going to have a son, and he's going to tell me what name it would be important. And that's how the Hebrew people were, just automatically, if the names had importance. And so that's why I looked it up. And God is gracious because, you see, God was getting ready to send Jesus. This is going to happen within a year of that time. And it was good to know that God is gracious. He is kind and loving. And the Jewish people at that time were in darkness and waiting for the Messiah to come. And Jesus, we know, is the Messiah. And so they're waiting for him. And now the angel says, name him John, which means God is gracious. Verse 14, you will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the eyes of the Lord. He must never touch wine or other alcoholic drinks. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. And he will turn many Israelites to the Lord their God. I just want to clarify Israelites. In the Bible, Israelites and Hebrews and Jews are used almost interchangeable. There's very slight differences between them. So just so you'll know that when I use those words, it's still the same people. He will turn many Israelites to their God. Verse 17, he will be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. Elijah was a great prophet from the Old Testament, and he went out into the wilderness and he would teach and preach to people to return to God. And that's why they're saying that John did the same thing. He went out into the wilderness, and when he was an adult, of course. And so that's why the Bible says he'll be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will cause those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly. I like that, the idea that the hearts of the fathers turn to the children. We have many men who are not loving and caring toward their children, and this is talking about them becoming tenderhearted again. And that the rebellious, so often children are considered rebellious, and that they will accept the wisdom of the godly. So now I'm at verse 18. Zechariah said to the angel, how can I be sure this will happen? I'm an old man now, and my wife is also well along in years. If he came to you and said something, would you have doubts? Would you say to yourself, I don't know, could this be true? I mean, it's an angel. But I'm glad that this happened because it added a layer of proof. And again, we recognize that Zechariah wasn't just somebody who's just like, oh, sure, whatever. He actually listened, and he asked questions. He dealt with it. So the angel said, this would be verse 19. Then the angel said, I am Gabriel. Gabriel, I stand in the very presence of God. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. Gabriel is mentioned by name. I think there were 3 angels mentioned by name. I think it was. But anyway, Gabriel is spoken of coming to speak specifically to people 5 different times. And the fact that he stands in the presence of God, I really, of all the things Gabriel could have said, I mean, I'm Gabriel, I'm the messenger of God. I'm Gabriel, I'm you know, powerful over armies. He could have said a lot of things, but he said, I stand in the presence of God. And the best insight I can get to that is rather like an honored and favored servant, a trusted servant who stands there in the presence of the king and keeps his attention on the king. And if the king says, go and do or go get, the king doesn't even have to worry again because he's told the servant and the servant will do it. And I believe that is what Gabriel is saying. I stand in the presence of God. I'm trusted and honored. And when God tells me I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And so it says, it was he who sent me to bring you this good news. Verse 20. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born, for my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. And it's good that we could have a sign that happened. And I think it was good for Zechariah when he began to have any doubts whatsoever. He couldn't tell anybody because he couldn't speak. And it would remind him that that was really the angel of Gabriel. He hadn't made something crazy up. Now, verse 21. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary, wondering why he had taken so long. When he finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. Then they realized from his gestures and his silence that he must have seen a vision in the sanctuary. When Zechariah's week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. See, this is where Luke says 5 months. How kind the Lord is, she exclaimed. He has taken away my disgrace of having no children. 5 months. At that time, it was very evident that she was pregnant. This is when it begins to be really, a pregnancy really shows. At 4 months, you're not 100% certain, but when you look at a woman when she's 5 months, you say to yourself, she's pregnant. And at 5 months, she can feel that baby move. And so this was where they were ready to be confirmed, and that's what Luke is doing. Another thing we know that at 5 months, it's very unlikely that there'll be a miscarriage. Generally, babies, once they reach 5 months, then you can be assured that this baby will be born. Of course, we know this baby will be born because it was prophesied by the Lord, by the angel. But I want to address Elizabeth when she says, how kind the Lord is. And then she says, he has taken away my disgrace of having no children. So many women have felt disgraced because they didn't have children. There have been men who have mistreated their wives terribly because the wives weren't able to have children. And Zechariah was not cruel to Elizabeth, but it had to be hard. Other women, you know how women can be, and friends and neighbors, and always those questions, well, when are you going to have children? You know how it's done, don't you? And that type of stuff. Oh, Elizabeth's heart surely ached and hurt. I know that so many women hurt over that. And then it is normal for human beings. This is what happens when that thing that we want so hard, so much. There's a verse in the Bible, and I'm not going to look it up, but it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And that's about how it must have been. Of course they wanted children. And when it was put off, and they weren't able to receive this, their hearts were sick. And then I'm sure that they began to think maybe they weren't worthy. Maybe God didn't love them like he did the others. Maybe God was punishing them. This is what we do. Women and men all over the place do that. And it's not just children. We do that with being married or being happy in marriage. We do it in having a good job versus not having a good job. We say, well, if God loved me, or I must have done something wrong. And this, I want to point back to where is it? Verse 6. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes. They were righteous in God's eyes. Was God punishing them? No, no. They were righteous in God's eyes. He saw them and he knew them, and he loved the fact that they were careful to obey all the Lord's commandments and regulations, and they were righteous in his eyes. But he had a plan for them. The plan was for them to have this wonderful baby, John, born in the last of their lives, when they could tell the stories forever, and this child would be filled with the Holy Spirit. God had a plan, and he needed to bring them to a place where they could carefully nurture John to become the man that God had intended. Now we're ending here in Luke chapter 1, verse 26, where Elizabeth says that, well, verse 25 is where we're ending. How kind the Lord is. He has taken away my disgrace of having no children. And we'll begin next time in Luke chapter 1, verse 26, when we pick up the story with Gabriel going to talk to Mary, who will become the mother of Jesus. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time at Ann Teaches Bible. Thank you.